In the future, a magical dental brace appeared. If two people wore it for an hour and played a game, the loser would become the slave of the winner. They had to obey all commands that did not endanger life unconditionally. The game's fairness did not matter. Winning meant controlling the other entirely. Its power made many disregard the law. The story begins with a girl who thought her online love interest was handsome, but he turned out to be sleazy when they met. He soon showed his true colors and assaulted her sexually on the way home. However, she didn't call the police, choosing to seek revenge herself. Holding a dental brace, which was no ordinary brace, she dressed seductively the next day and went to the arcade he frequented. Mistaking her intentions for turning him into the police, he was surprised when she suggested a game instead. The rules were simple. The one with more pachinko balls after an hour wins, with a bonus for the winner. Confused but enticed, he wore the brace. He was initially unsure as this was his best game, but noticed her backpack and thought it was filled with pinballs. However, she quickly cleared his confusion. Despite his good luck with the machine and seeming victory, with 1 minute left and her having no pinballs, she called over an employee, and a large number of pinballs she had played for since morning were brought out. According to the rules, she won, even if it seemed like cheating. The man was furious, but at that moment, he felt she was the victor, all because of the magic of the dental brace. This device, called SCM, allows two people to compete. The loser becomes a slave and must obey the winner's commands at all times. However, it does not force the slave to act beyond their capabilities or manipulate their emotions, and will not cause them to commit suicide. A girl commanded a man to punch himself in the face, which he did. His life thereafter was clearly not easy, and the device continued to spread among people. The girl became a slave due to her loss and emotionlessly agreed to sleep with the man. Aya, a high school student who got involved after a chance encounter, listened as her friend complained about her ex-boyfriend dating another man, which upset her friend. Aya immediately suggested teaching him a lesson. They arranged a meeting with the ex-boyfriend, named Ota, who brought along a guy with an explosive hairstyle named Shinosuke. Watching their behavior, Aya doubted they were a couple and challenged them to kiss as proof. Ota, citing the crowd, initially refused, but Iya unexpectedly kissed her friend. Ota, left with no choice, suggested they guess the relationship of people at a neighboring table. If they guessed correctly, he would explain. Her friend thought they were a couple, while Shinosuke guessed they were a prostitute and a client. Aya shook her head, indicating they had no relationship. Ota agreed with this answer, but decided to discuss the reason only in private with Aya. The next day, they met by a lake. Ota was curious about Aya's actions the previous day. She explained that she could tell by the girl's body language, constantly checking her phone unwillingly, similar to a failed online romance. Excited, Ota introduced the SCM to Aya, her first encounter with it. His excitement stemmed from his plans to try the device himself by continuously challenging others with SCM. If he ever became enslaved accidentally, he hoped Aya would save him. From the moment he met her, he knew she was the partner he had been searching for. Ota's challenge inspired the previously confused Aya, so she agreed to his request. The SCM also has special software that displays the wearer's location when activated. On the map, a square represents someone who has never used SCM, a triangle indicates a slave, and a circle a master. However, the map only shows a few kilometers around, so wearing it doesn't guarantee being discovered. When someone with an SCM approaches, it vibrates. Using the software, their first target of challenge is a young couple. Their story is quite interesting. The man, named Seiya, is a male prostitute, and Ayaka often visits his business. Unbeknownst to Ayaka, Seiya planned to use her ignorance to make her lose intentionally. However, Ayaka knew about SCM and turned the tables perfectly. Seiya did this because he was tired of Ayaka and even used her money to travel with his girlfriend. Hearing this, Ayaka shed tears of sadness. What devastated her most was her realization that in Seiya's eyes, she was just a disgusting ATM. Unable to bear it anymore, Ayaka found solace in the fact that Seiya was now her slave, and she planned to live a better life with him. However, at this moment, Ota and Aya approached them to propose a match. The competition would be a 2 versus 2 team battle. with the losers becoming slaves to the winners. Seiya calmed Ayaka and encouraged her to continue the battle. The game involved raising thumbs and guessing the total number raised. The person who guessed correctly would put down one hand, and winning required 2 correct guesses. Since it was a team battle, the team of the last person to fold would lose. Seiya and Ota were the first to fold their hands, leaving Ayaka and Aya each with one hand. The final showdown was between Ayaka, who grew increasingly nervous, and Aya, who remained calm and indifferent to the possibility of becoming a slave. Ultimately, Aya won. At this moment, Ayaka couldn't hold back anymore and couldn't understand Aya's calmness. It turned out Aya wasn't wearing an SCM. If they lost, only Ota would become their slave. Ayaka felt they were the true partners, while Seiya, relieved, was no longer Ayaka's slave. He preferred being a slave to anyone else over being Ayaka's. Ota instructed them to resume normal life and refuse any challenges if approached. After this event, Seiya, looking at the pitiful Ayaka, decided to bury the hatchet. That night, alone on the rooftop, Seiya reminisced about the time he was beaten for deceiving someone, his first encounter with Julia, who later became his girlfriend. However, due to the SCM, he had to break up with Julia, which drastically changed his fate. Reflecting on his life, Seiya couldn't help but marvel at its dramatic ups and downs. At that moment, Julia suddenly appeared. Seiya grabbed her, determined not to let go this time. Julia warned that if Seiya let go, he would lose. Seiya was looking forward to their future together. But then Julia removed her coat and revealed that she had become someone else's slave. Panicked, Seiya released her hand and thus lost the match. The terms of the contest had been set without him realizing, and Seiya temporarily became Julia's slave, all orchestrated by Ryuu. Before this, Seiya had to continue his undercover work. Meanwhile, Ota found compromising photos of Julia online and asked Seiya if he knew anything. Seiya remained silent for a long time, which made Ota realize that Seiya was no longer his slave, as a slave cannot disobey their master. For safety, Julia removed Seiya's SCM device, preventing them from competing. With no other option, the group had to leave. Ota, however, challenged Ryuu, telling him to be ready. Seiya was in agony, placing his hopes on Ota to rescue Julia. Meanwhile, a girl approached a woman, volunteering to become her slave. The girl, named Nakano, found Adachi attractive and handsome. Coincidentally, Adachi played the queen character at a cosplay shop frequented by men with various fetishes. Adachi assumed this was just a quirky interest of Nakano's and decided to indulge her. Nakano vowed that if Adachi lost, she would release her immediately. Adachi wasn't concerned. At that moment, 2 foolish men tried to flirt with them. Adachi immediately proposed a contest where the men would compete by spending money. The one who spent more would win. Soon, Nakano had men spending money on her, while the man with Adachi turned out to be stingy. Seeing this, Adachi resorted to her last trick, using a sexy uniform to win over the man. Nakano didn't back down either. Eventually, the 4 headed to a beer hall to compete in drinking. The difference between Nakano and Adachi was only 700 yen. On the way home, they encountered a puppy. Kind-hearted Adachi fed it, and surprisingly, this puppy turned out to be the most morally upright character in the anime. With 1 hour left to midnight, all Adachi needed to do was drink the beer to win the contest. But the next second, Adachi collapsed. It turned out the man had drugged her drink. Shinosuke, evidently unaware, watched as a sober Nakano rescued Adachi. When Adachi awoke, an unexpected event occurred. Nakano's wig fell off, revealing he was actually a man. Adachi had to admire Nakano. As a man, he managed to get other men to spend more money. It seemed she had lost. Just as Adachi admitted defeat, she became a slave. Suddenly, the SCM vibrated. A bald man, using location tracking, approached them. His name was Bunkyo. Mistaking Adachi for his master, he forcefully grabbed her and demanded a competition involving physical combat. If Adachi refused, she would face severe beating. With no choice, she had to accept the fight. Facing this brutality, Adachi naturally lost. Nakano also had to submit to Bunkyo and call him master, which caused Bunkyo to lower his guard, allowing Nakano to narrowly escape. She felt a deep sense of guilt towards Adachi. realizing she had underestimated the SCM device. In her moment of confusion, Julia appeared. After learning about the situation, Julia offered a condition. If Nakano became her ally, she could help rescue Adachi. Besides Julia, Ryuwu had other slaves, including the man with glasses present. For safety, Julia and Nakano agreed to a contest. Rescuing Adachi would mean Julia's victory, ensuring Nakano couldn't breach the contract. They used the software to locate Bunkyo, but the software also showed other people at the scene. Upon arrival, they found Bunkyo fighting a dog. It turned out the third SCM owner was the dog. The dog bit Bunkyo, who pleaded for mercy. At that moment, he became the dog's slave. Bunkyo actually had a connection with Ayaka. He once injured her, and when Ayaka called for help, Bunkyo easily defeated her helpers. A ruthless boss witnessed this and admired Bunkyo's skills. He tempted Bunkyo with the promise of becoming his heir. Thinking of reaching the peak of his career, Bunkyo joined the ruthless boss. His job was to subdue women using the SCM, earning $1 million for each one brought back. Bunkyo's first targets were Adachi and Nakano. After Nakano escaped, a small dog burst out of the bushes. Confused, Bunkyo loudly challenged the dog to a fight. Surprisingly, the dog barked, and the contest officially began. The fight ended with the dog as the victor. The dog then approached Adachi, apparently to repay her for feeding it earlier. Afterwards, Nakano confronted Bunkyo and forced him into a fight, making him a slave too. Ryuwu's ranks of subordinates kept growing. At this point, Aya and Ota arrived. Unexpectedly, Aya was the original owner of the dog. She was unaware of the SCM on the dog and wanted to remove it, but the dog refused. The secret behind this refusal intrigued Ota even more. Meanwhile, the so-called Ryu finally appeared. He was just a child. Leveraging his unique identity as a child, Ryu had acquired many slaves. The young man named Zero was a low-level worker. One day, Ryu approached Zero, asking for his help to avenge his father, whose brain had been damaged by an SCM device. As a child, no one would agree to duel him, so he hoped Zero would help. Seeing Ryuwu's pitiful state, Zero agreed. Before starting, Zero had to wear an SCM. His opponent was Ataru, and the contest was to solve riddles. The winner would be the first to answer 3 questions correctly. Before beginning, Ryu also joined in. Ataru successfully answered 2 questions, and Ryu was not far behind. When Ataru failed the 3rd question, it meant Ryu could win with 1 more correct answer. However, Zero easily answered the question. At that moment, Ryu revealed his true intentions. Zero's actual opponent was Ryu. Ataru was not wearing an SCM. The score was actually 2-1. The story about his father was a lie. After Ryu answered the 3rd question, Zero became his slave. Zero did not understand why Ryu would do such a thing. Ryu casually mentioned that someone like Zero, a low-level worker, would not be missed if he disappeared. His choice was mainly because he found it interesting. However, when Ryu gave an order, Zero refused. Fortunately for Ryu, he had many underlings, and they eventually brought Zero back. This was the first time people saw someone defy an order, but when Zero woke up, he still had to obey Ryu. Zero told Ryu that he had heard a voice in his head urging him to escape, which is why he ran away. This matter was temporarily set aside. Because Julia brought a letter, the writer claimed to have a mental issue and had taken Bunkyo. She wanted to challenge Ryu to a match. Ryuo's expression turned fierce, surprised that someone would come forward willingly. Additionally, Ota received a challenge from the same person. After confirming that the challenge was not sent by Ryu, Ota realized a 3rd force had emerged. He decided to take Ayaka to the challenge, hoping Aya would help. Aya noticed that Ayaka did not want to go. She could not resist Ota as she was his slave. Aya was angry at Ota's actions. By then, Ota was deeply ensnared by the allure of the SCM, his rationality consumed by desire. Unexpectedly, Ota shoved Aya. At that moment, Aya decided to leave and no longer aid Ota in acquiring more slaves. Upon returning home, Aya hesitated about whether to return the SCM to Ota. Just then, she received a picture of Ota bound. He had lost to the person with mental issues. Despite her reservations, Aya decided to rescue him. However, when she arrived at the location, Ota was unharmed. He demanded Aya lose to him. Naturally, Aya refused. Just as she was about to decline, noise came from the bathroom where Ayaka was found sitting in a bathtub filled with cold water. As a slave, Ayaka couldn't resist, and Ota used this to coerce Aya into cooperating. Seeing Ota's obsession, Aya slapped him. Ota had already thought of a way to keep Aya by his side. Though he couldn't make Aya lose to him, he planned to enslave her dog, knowing Aya wouldn't abandon her beloved pet. Faced with Ota's despicable tactics, Aya was about to refuse, but her dog bravely stood up. The contest was cruel. They were to see who could eat faster, but the table was empty. In his madness, Ota demanded they eat the utensils. Aya, unwilling to let her dog and Ayaka endure such a brutal contest, wanted to stop it. Ota, however, claimed that once an SCM match started, it couldn't be stopped. While they argued, Ayaka had already finished the cutlery, claiming victory. The victorious Ota was still not satisfied. Now fully lost to his desires, he was set to face the mentally challenged opponent, not yet realizing the gap between them. Back home, Aya was uncertain about the future, while her concerned dog wondered why her owner was involved in this war. The dog, named Sumida, once lived a carefree life. One day, a truck passed by their home, and a female dog on it caught Sumida's attention. Driven by love, Sumida chased after the truck but eventually reached its physical limits and got injured. At a critical moment, an elderly man rescued Sumida. This man, a professor specializing in brain research, had developed the SCM device initially intended for taming animals. However, it was misused by those with ulterior motives. One day, Setagaya broke into the lab, sedated Sumida with an anesthetic, and stole all the data from the computers. By the next day, everyone knew Setagaya was responsible. Yet the professor chose not to pursue him, as Setagaya had once been his colleague. Consequently, the lab was forced to shut down, and the professor returned to a rural life. Sumida volunteered to wear the SCM, hoping to use its vibrations to locate Setagaya and retrieve the stolen data, feeling this was the only way to repay the professor. However, upon returning home that evening, Sumida found the professor had taken his own life. Sumida let out a mournful cry and began roaming the streets looking for Setagaya. Although Setagaya was not found, Sumida accidentally saved Adachi and eventually reunited with Aya. This is why Sumida ended up wearing the SCM. Now, back to the main topic. Ota was riding the train home when suddenly someone held him at gunpoint with an anesthesia needle. The assailant was the mentally disturbed individual, a woman who wanted to challenge Ota. Ota had no choice but to call Aya for help and agreed to the woman's challenge. Before he could react, the woman's subordinates subdued him, and the content on his phone became blurry. The woman had already drugged Ota and took him to her base. When he regained consciousness, he was confronted by 5 people, including her slaves and Ayaka. The woman's name was Fujiko. She had deceived Ayaka into becoming a slave using a message from Ota's phone. Her sole purpose in capturing Ota was to inquire about a man with dark skin and hair like a lion, which made Ota think of Shinosuke. Ota explained that he and Shinosuke were close friends who had planned to start a business together using the SCM to make some money. However, as the value of the SCM skyrocketed, Shinosuke wanted to sell it while Ota wanted to use it, leading them to part ways. Upon hearing this, Fujiko licked her lips. It turned out that a few months earlier, Fujiko had been harassed by a gang, and Shinosuke had come to her rescue. She was deeply captivated by him at that moment. After a one-night stand, Shinosuke left, leaving behind the SCM. In Fujiko's eyes, by continually collecting slaves, she would eventually meet Shinosuke again. At that time, she planned to offer everything she owned to him. She was a typical love-struck individual. After getting her answer, Fujiko continued her contest with Ota. The rule was the first to see their mother would lose. Ota was bound and brought before his mother, a severe disgrace. His first order as a slave was to capture Aya and to avoid answering her calls. He went to the factory to meet Fujiko, but a mysterious person suddenly appeared, challenging Ota to lose to him by playing scissors in a rock-paper-scissors game. Ota agreed, but ultimately chose paper, and the mysterious person, having predicted scissors, defeated Ota. This person who understood Ota so well was naturally Aya. Although she and Sumida were upset with him, she still honored her agreement with Ota. Ota cried tears of regret, and apologized to Aya. Aya knew Ota had failed because of a previous phone call where Ota was silent and train sounds could be heard. She realized something had happened to him. Aya will continue using the SCM, instructing Ota to capture a girl on the roadside and force her to lose to herself. Watching Aya descend further into the abyss, Sumida couldn't help but look worried. However, Aya's enslavement of others was not for her own gain. Her goal was to dominate all SCM-bearing slaves and then liberate them, ultimately destroying the SCM. Ota naturally supported this goal, and they returned to their previous relationship. Julia, who lost her parents as a child, never had anyone truly care for her. Just as she was losing hope in life, Seiya entered her world. This gentleman reignited her hope for life. However, unexpectedly, he kicked her out of the house. With nowhere to go, Julia could only stay at an internet cafe. When the bar owner learned about her situation, she introduced Julia to a friend who could spare a room for her to stay temporarily. But upon arriving, Julia felt something was off about the place. Only a child named Ryu lived there, and his mother, who worked away from home, seldom returned. Despite the strange atmosphere, Julia, feeling a sense of responsibility while living under someone else's roof, decided to take care of Ryu. One evening, Julia went to Ryu's room, hoping to build a closer relationship with him. Ryu suggested they play a counting game, 20 grab, starting from 1, with a maximum of 3 numbers spoken at a time. The person who says 20 loses. He also introduced the SCM as a game accessory to enhance the fun, claiming it could create a tingling sensation. Julia saw this as a good opportunity to bond with Ryu and agreed to play. However, the game ended quickly because the strategy to win involved securing the numbers 19, 15, 11, 7, and 3. Julia realized she had already lost. At that moment, she felt a strange sensation in her body. Ryu ordered her to take off her clothes, and Julia found her body acting against her will, following his commands. Ryu confirmed that the SCM can indeed turn people into slaves. Later, he took Julia to the red light district, ignoring her protests. Ryu ran inside, and Julia reluctantly followed. It turned out Ryu's mother owed a large debt and was forced to work there. Ryu wanted to take his mother away, but the boss demanded 1 billion yen. Back home, Ryu devised a plan to use Julia as bait. He spread humiliating videos of Julia to attract more SCM users, planning to enslave them and seize their wealth. Seeing Ryu's desperate efforts to save his mother, Julia was moved and willing to sacrifice everything for him. Ryu is set to face Fujiko in a duel. Both sides have agreed on the rules, a 5 versus 5 match in a warehouse, with each team choosing a base and planting their flag. The team whose flag is captured loses. They can also use any method to stop the opponent, but if someone falls or lifts both feet off the ground, they are eliminated. As the contest begins, Fujiko starts strategizing, ordering her slaves to attack from both sides. Her team has 2 strong men, giving them an advantage in the assault. Bunkyo leads the charge and initially encounters Adachi, attacking her immediately. However, he falls into a trap and is disqualified for falling. Adachi attempts to press the advantage and attack the enemy base, but Fujiko's team is prepared and knocks Adachi out with falling objects from above. Meanwhile, Ayaka, together with Meguro, encounters Seiya. Despite not wanting to fight Seiya, they can't disobey their master's orders and attack him. Seiya manages to fend them off only briefly, leaving Ryu's team with just 2 slaves. As they are pursued, Ryu's slave Ataru quickly falls into a trap. At this moment, Fujiko realizes Ryu is missing. Julia is alone, guarding the base. Seeing victory within reach, Fujiko orders a full assault. Unexpectedly, Julia activates a switch, sending electricity through her body and collapsing injured in water. Fujiko urges her team to capture the flag, but the surrounding electrical current deters them, as slaves will not risk their lives. Just then, Ryu reappears, having easily bypassed the traps. The battle concludes with Ryu's victory. Julia regains consciousness, and Fujiko is forced to admire Julia's bravery. Ryu gathered everyone and reported a problem with the SCM map. Normally, the SCM map only shows 3 symbols: circles for masters, triangles for slaves, and squares for new SCM users. However, a star-shaped symbol has appeared, which is unexplained. Reisuu, determined not to overlook any SCM user, discovered that this star symbol was located at a school. He sent Julia to infiltrate the school and gather information. Fujiko volunteered to join her. Disguised in a uniform, Julia explored the school but found nothing unusual. Fujiko, a nurse by profession, posed as the school nurse and used her position to copy the school staff list. Unexpectedly, they found Setagaya at the school. Fujiko informed Julia, directing her to a classroom on the 3rd floor to meet an SCM user. However, only a girl was there, who challenged Julia to a match. At that moment, Julia did not have her SCM. Setagaya arrived, introduced the girl as his assistant Kita, and expressed a desire to talk with Julia. Sensing trouble, Julia tried to react, but was stopped by Fujiko, who was now Setagaya's slave. Julia was then captured. Julia's obedience and willingness to sacrifice for her master far exceed those of other slaves, making her a valuable specimen to Setagaya. He revealed to Julia that he is the star-shaped SCM user they have been searching for, possessing a unique judgment SCM and being the creator of SCM itself. He needs special samples like Julia to refine the SCM. However, Julia, whose loyalty lies solely with Ryu, was unwilling to cooperate. Faced with Julia's strong resistance, Setagaya decided to use the SCM to make her comply. Seeing her as a special sample, Setagaya took the opportunity to test how much humans can resist the temptations of SCM when Julia refused to wear it. Although slaves can remove the SCM for short periods, they cannot withstand the side effects of continuous removal. The SCM causes specific physical discomforts, eventually rendering the person incapacitated. Meanwhile, Ohta and Aya were preparing to take action. Aya decided to target the unscrupulous boss and Kita. At that moment, Kita was complaining to her father, Narima, about how he had overly pampered her throughout her life. When she was injured by a neighbor's child as a young girl, that family moved away the next day. Later, when she was bullied by delinquents, they quickly suffered severe injuries. As she grew up, anyone who approached her would mysteriously disappear. Her father considered this normal until she met Setagaya, who gave her an SCM. She used it to enslave her father. Aya interrupted them and directly challenged them to an SCM duel, proposing a contest in their area of expertise, collecting money. Aya set the rules. Previous deposits wouldn't count, and no tools like smartphones could be used. They had 2 hours to collect money independently. At the end of the time, the person with the most money would win. This was a challenge they couldn't refuse, practically handing over a slave to the winner. As the contest began, Kita followed Aya to monitor her, while Sumida stayed behind to watch Narima. Although phone use was prohibited, Narima could still track Aya's movements through a listening device on Kita. Aya, singing in the park, had previously arranged for her slaves to bring her money, successfully earning 500,000 yen. Meanwhile, a loan shark visited Narima's office offering an immediate loan of 10 million yen. After Narima signed the papers, the lender noticed that the name on the contract was Aya's, not Narima's. Ota, who had been discovered, tried to escape, but being on enemy territory, he was quickly restrained. The contract's interest rate was exorbitant, and with a demand for repayment within 30 minutes, Ota realized the lender was Aya's accomplice. His men managed to collect 900,000 yen, and with the 10 million yen from Ota, they thought victory was certain. Aya, who seemingly only had 1 million yen, appeared defeated. However, Narima underestimated her. The bag containing the 10 million yen suddenly exploded. This was all part of Aya's plan, to let Ota deliver the 10 million yen, lowering the enemy's guard while setting a timer in the money bag. With 900,000 yen against 1 million, Aya won the contest, enslaving both Narima and Kita. Narima had to admire Aya's audacity to actually burn 10 million yen, seeing her as the only type of person who could confront their adversary. Maria is a virtual streamer, but in reality, she is an overweight middle-aged woman. Despite this, some men idolize her as a goddess, including a young man named Geku. One day, Maria contacted Geku and asked him to monitor one of Ryuau's subordinates. Geku has a special ability to detect the sound of SCMs with his senses. Guided by these sounds in his mind, he saw Fujiko and Setagaya in the infirmary. At that time, Setagaya, posing as a buyer of SCM, tricked Fujiko into wearing an SCM. Once Setagaya put on the Judgment SCM, Fujiko became his slave. This was almost like a bug-level weapon. Geku witnessed this event and reported everything to Maria. In response, Maria gave him an SCM and instructed him to assist a man named Kiyoshi. Geku quickly found Ryu, with Zero nearby. When Geku mentioned the name Kiyoshi, Zero was visibly shocked and no longer appeared innocent. He quietly approached Geku, revealing that he was Kiyoshi, and instructed him on what to do next. The two engaged in an SCM duel, and Geku predictably lost to Kiyoshi. Now, all Ryu needed to do was wear the SCM to make Geku his slave. Ryu, unsuspecting, put on the SCM, but it suddenly vibrated, indicating someone else was approaching. Normally, slaves don't trigger such a reaction, but this was the moment Kiyoshi was waiting for. At this point, Ataru and Nakano arrived. Kiyoshi had Geku block them, but despite his eagerness, Geku had almost no fighting ability and was quickly defeated by Nakano. Ryu took this chance to break free from Kiyoshi. Fortunately, Maria arrived just in time, allowing Kiyoshi and Geku to escape. This story began a week earlier. While at work, Maria's doorbell rang. She was puzzled to see a strange young man claiming to be Kiyoshi, especially since Kiyoshi was supposed to be a woman and had died in a car accident. In fact, Kiyoshi was Zero's mother. She explained that due to special circumstances, she could inhabit her son's body, though she couldn't control when she was conscious. She could only give Maria Zero's address before hurriedly leaving. 20 years ago, Maria went to prison for fighting, where she met Kiyoshi, a fellow inmate. Kiyoshi's cheerful nature gave her hope in life, for which she was always grateful. Despite her doubts, Maria went to the address Kiyoshi had left. The door was opened by Zero, who felt ill, often experiencing memory loss. When he tried to recall the name Kiyoshi, she would take over his body. Kiyoshi speculated that all this was caused by the SCM. Maria's task was to free Zero from slavery. Kiyoshi planned to wear the SCM and confront Ryu, but the duel with Ryu never happened. Kiyoshi could only control the body for a few hours each day, leaving Maria to protect Zero afterwards. Maria told Zero she was his psychotherapist and could treat his amnesia, which convinced him to stay with her. Ryu quickly guessed that Zero had dual personalities. After Julia, Fujiko, and Meguro went to school, there was no further news of them. Ataru decided to take action to rescue Julia. They captured Meguro, hoping to get information from him, but he was ordered not to speak by his master and was not wearing an SCM, so they couldn't forcibly duel to take him back. After a thorough search, they found a note in his underwear with a time and place. They arrived at the location early to ambush the arrivals, Setagaya and Fujiko, unaware of Setagaya's identity, but planning to deal with them together. Ataru aimed a gun at Setagaya, demanding that he put on an SCM and lose a duel to him. However, this played right into Setagaya's trap. With a snap of his fingers, everyone became his slave. Setagaya explained that Meguro was bait he had released intentionally, and was surprised by how many people fell for it. Setagaya called Ryu, who was now completely stripped of power, revealed his identity as the creator of a new type of SCM, and informed Ryu that all his slaves were now under Setagaya's control. Ryu was concerned about Julia, but Setagaya assured him not to worry, saying he would enjoy her, and sent Ryu a photo of Julia, making Ryu furious. On the other hand, following a failed mission, Maria decided to put on the SCM herself and duel Zero. However, the SCM vibrated unexpectedly, as Zero was not wearing one. Wondering what was happening, Maria opened the door to check, only to be hit by a steel marble. A mysterious person forced Maria into a match, challenging her to dodge the marbles. Maria ran desperately, but was ultimately hit. After enslaving Nerima and Kita, Aya learned about the existence of the star-shaped SCM and that Setagaya was its user. Nerima revealed that soon after he started using the SCM, Setagaya approached him, enslaved him with a snap of his fingers, and forced him to help sell slaves. As everyone felt powerless against the invincible trial SCM, Ota received a message that their slaves had been kidnapped and were summoned to a specific location for a battle, which was clearly a trap. Aya came up with a plan to rescue the slaves before the battle, to avoid confronting Setagaya. They arrived early at the warehouse and saw Setagaya and Fujiko. Suddenly, Ataru spotted several people in hiding. However, they were not Ota, but decoys, as Aya had arranged for someone to impersonate her to lure out the enemy. Narima's men then surrounded the warehouse, trapping Setagaya's group. Aya and her team could then rescue the slaves, but they accidentally triggered a trap and fell. Setagaya had anticipated their move and used the same tactic to have Meguro impersonate him, easily capturing Ota. However, he realized Aya was not among them. Just moments before, Ota had used all his skills to help Aya escape alone, as survival was their only hope. For Setagaya, it was irrelevant, as a solitary Aya posed no threat to him. He quickly eliminated both opposing forces. Setagaya and Fujiko celebrated early with champagne, now that Setagaya had the most slaves. Fujiko asked Setagaya why the trial SCM was so powerful, and Setagaya, admiring her attractive figure, revealed all his secrets. The SCM's users embed the memory of their defeat deeply in their minds if they ever lose a challenge. The trial. SCM can trigger these memories of failure, creating a sense of defeat and allowing control over the opponent using the trial SCM. However, this has a flaw. It doesn't work on SCM users who have never lost. The trial SCM also imposes a significant physical strain on its user. Setagaya has been collecting SCM samples to improve on this issue. Just then, two men burst in and restrained Setagaya. They were led by Takio, a mysterious SCM user not yet under Setagaya's control. Using force, Takio coerced Setagaya into losing to him. Setagaya pretended to agree, planning to control Takio the moment he donned the trial SCM. However, Takio was already aware of the trial SCM and its weaknesses. Since he had never lost, he couldn't be defeated. The challenge was to determine if Takio was lying in his statements. Fujiko approached, and Setagaya thought to ask her for help, but all of Setagaya's information had actually been provided to Takio by Fujiko, who had become Takio's slave to gain information about Shinosuke from him. Willingly becoming Takio's pawn, Fujiko enabled Takio to win the match, leading to Setagaya's defeat. Takio, originally a daydreamer considered a loser, felt disrespected by those around him. He acquired an SCM at an auction, intent on enslaving others to trample them beneath his feet. Takio's first slave was Sachi, a club worker whom he abused and used her savings. Sachi was later taken by Aya, and Takio lost contact with her. While walking, he bumped into Shinosuke, whose kindness only panicked him further, deepening his hatred for the world. Using a map, he located many SCM owners, targeting Maria as the weakest first, then using Shinosuke to capture Fujiko. By having his slaves wear the SCM, he quickly enslaved 18 people. Takio laughed joyously, feeling like a winner in life, and began his reign of terror. Women were to please him, and men were hunted like prey in the forest with marbles. After narrowly escaping, Aya received a phone number from Ota. Not knowing who the number belonged to, Aya called and reached Ota's friend, Shinosuke. Aya informed him that Ota had been enslaved and sought his help. Despite past friction with Ota, Shinosuke agreed to help Aya. Unfortunately, the SCM map was unusable for unknown reasons, so they had to rely on information provided by their allies. Despite the risk of a trap, they had no other options. Shinosuke raised the biggest challenge. Knowing the enemy's location, how could they defeat someone with 18 slaves? Facing impossible odds at 2 against 18, they were at a loss until Ryu approached them, offering to join forces against Takio, as his most important person, Julia, was also held by Takio. At this time, Takio was still enjoying his imperial lifestyle, sending Zero to select female slaves to serve him, unaware that Kiyoshi was controlling Zero's body and secretly sending messages to Aya. With this information, Aya and 2 others arrived outside the building. Ryu directed from outside while Aya stealthily entered the 3rd floor. Before Takio could react, Aya was already behind him, forcing him into a contest where the first to plead for mercy would lose. Takio tried to use the trial SCM to control her, but Aya had never lost an SCM duel, rendering the trial SCM ineffective against her. However, Takio had Bunkyo and Meguro secretly positioned to easily capture Aya. Takio, seeing his advantage, agreed to Aya's challenge. Ryu, listening in, knew this was all part of their plan to deliberately sacrifice Aya to create an opportunity for Shinosuke to enter the building and plant explosives. Aya had to endure the torture without surrendering. Once the explosives were set, Ryu detonated them. The violent explosion left Takio bewildered upstairs, wanting to order everyone back to the 3rd floor to protect him, but slaves wouldn't risk their lives. After a fierce fight with the controlled Ota, Shinosuke prepared to go to the third floor to rescue Aya. Shinosuke learned from Ota that Takio had moved the women from the warehouse to the basement, which was soon to be threatened by a spreading fire. Ryuu had to go alone to rescue them. Meanwhile, Takio continued to torture Aya to win their contest, but Aya refused to beg for mercy. As the fire grew, Takio wanted to flee, disregarding the contest. However, he turned to see Zero, not knowing Zero had two personalities. Kiyoshi freed Aya's hands just as Shinosuke arrived. Outnumbered, Takio was easily beaten. With the fire reaching the third floor and the stairs inaccessible, Shinosuke chose to jump out the window. At that moment, Takio pleaded for mercy. Fortunately, there was cushioning below that saved everyone. Ryuu, who went alone to rescue the women, found the place but had no key and tried to break down the door. Despite his efforts, he couldn't open it. Just then, Ataru and others arrived, and together they broke the door open and rescued everyone. Finally, Gekko, guided by the faint sound of an SCM, arrived, bringing all SCM holders together. Aya emerged as the ultimate winner. Ryuu, not satisfied as he had never lost, challenged Aya to a coin toss. The outcome didn't matter anymore, as they all knew the dangers of the SCM.
奴隷から解放します